So I was going to make a video about the Stanley Cup final. You know, just Sharks, Penguins, Phil Kessel's continued success. And then Auston Matthews appears on my TV and I'm like, well, there it goes. Now it's all about the Leafs again. Now I got it. That's what I got to do. I'm making a video about the Leafs. Thanks, Don. And then I thought about it. What am I really going to talk about? Because that's all I've seen Leafs fans talk about for the last little while, besides the guys from the Leafs who are in the Stanley Cup final right now. Stuff like, oh, Auston Matthews is going to look great on the Leafs next year. He's going to look good right next to Steven Stamkos. Neither of those guys are Leafs yet. And here's who William Nylander's going to play with, and Mitch Marner. William Nylander has played 22 NHL games, which is 22 more than Mitch Marner. So I decided to finally do something that I've been putting off for a while now, looking at the Leafs depth chart like depth, because there are other players besides those four guys. And I wrote a big giant article about it on sportsnet.ca. You can check it out, but here is the short version. Let's start with the unrestricted free agents, because that's got a lot of the easy ones. Marquart Cabello is gone. He signed a 2-year deal in Switzerland. TJ Brennan probably gone. Sounds like he's going to Russia. Brad Boyes, he barely played for the Leafs this past season anyway. And Michael Grabner, well, it doesn't sound like he'll be back either. Of those four guys, Grabner was the only Leaf regular. He played 80 games. In fact, he played more games last season than Arcabello, Brennan, and Boyes combined. So if you assume none of those four guys come back, the Leafs have 2 more UFAs in the organization, and those are Rich Clun and P.A. Parento. I personally think it's a 50-50 shot for both guys, and I think that's a pretty unpopular opinion to have. What? Parento's coming back? Clun is coming back? I thought the Leafs were going to be all rookies under the age of 20. I, like many Leaf fans, was kind of annoyed when Parento wasn't traded at the deadline, because he could have easily gotten the Leafs a second-round pick, probably, if he wasn't injured. But then Nylander comes up, and then Parento comes back, and I see Nylander playing with Parento, and I'm like, hey, Parento's a bona fide NHLer. Nylander looks good playing with a bona fide NHLer. I like that. It seemed like responsible development. You can't just throw them to the wolves. And besides, are you really just going to give rookies a spot? That doesn't seem like a healthy thing to instill. And what if those rookies make your team and then they get hurt? Who's behind them? A rookie who's not as good. I'm down with Parento coming back. If Parento is down with coming back, for cheap. Rich Clun is another guy who just seemed beloved in the Marlies locker room, and he made the Leafs for a little while too. And I mentioned this in the article. Look, I didn't get to talk to Rich Clun a ton, but I did speak to him a little bit, and I got to sit in on some of the media scrums that he did. And I noticed 2 things. He brought up a couple things, unprompted, completely unprompted, more than once. The first was obviously the future that the Leafs organization has and the development of the young players around him that he's seen. The other that I thought was weird, and it would just be in the context of a Marlies only conversation, he would bring up Mike Babcock and Mike Babcock's systems and getting players to play that way. I'm not saying you should have this guy on your opening day roster with the Leafs. I am saying it wouldn't shock me at all to see the Leafs bring him back for a Marlies mostly role, and he gets the occasional call. Now we go to the restricted free agents and things get complicated. Peter Holland is probably your biggest name there just because he was on the Leafs last year, and I've been saying this for a while. I just don't think he's coming back. They didn't even have him play in center for a while. He didn't quite seem to fit, but he definitely has value. I think this guy is going to get traded at the draft. Then there's a guy like Sam Carrick. He's a veteran of the Leafs organization. He's been around for a while. He wears an A with the Marlies, but he just seems to be getting buried by all the talent flooding into the Leafs organization. The other weird one is Colin Smith, and you might be like, who the heck's Colin Smith? He came to the Leafs in the Sean Matthias deal. Now, he was just drafted in the KHL draft, and you might be saying, so what? And you'd be right, because that happens to players every year. They get drafted in the KHL, and they just never go. But CSKA Moscow just traded for Colin Smith's rights, and they paid handsomely for them. Smith is an RFA. He'll be 23 by the draft. It's unclear where he fits in the Leafs organization, but he has great offensive upside, and he's smallish. That has the makings of a KHL superstar. So the Leafs could convince him to stay. He can be a valuable part of the rebuild, play on the Marlies for a little bit, or he can go to Russia and make a ton of money. Then the guys who seem pretty clear to me that they're staying, Martin Marrinson is staying. He played his way up to the first pair by the end of last season. Frankie Corrado's staying. He's a right-handed defenseman. Might not make the team every night, but he's your 6'7" guy. And you got him for free. Thanks, Vancouver. And then there's Scott Harrington, who the Leafs got in the Phil Kessel deal. He was playing regularly on the Leafs until an injury sideline him for the rest of the season. Not to mention Connor Carrick, no relation to Sam. He was the Marlies' leading scorer in the playoffs. The Leafs are probably dying to re-sign him, and I think he'll make the team out of camp. One guy that I think is going to stay that I want to highlight, Garrett Sparks. After the NHL stint that he had and the fact that he played backup during most of the Calder Cup playoffs, you got to think his value is pretty low right now. And that's probably going to protect him, because why would you trade an asset when it's at its least valuable? The Leafs could use goalies anyway. Sparks battled injuries down the stretch, so he might have more to offer you than he was showing. I think he'll be back with the Leafs organization. Now, the wild cards that I get more in depth on in the article, Stuart Percy and Josh Levo. These are two guys who are RFAs, about 23 each, and I genuinely have no idea what their future is. They're two guys who I think definitely have value. I think the Leafs could trade them, especially at the draft, if they really wanted to. Levo's an AHL All-Star, Percy's a proven leader, and he's a pretty steady player. They could trade them. Or they could keep them and have them be a part of the rebuild. I've heard things like, well, Stuart Percy is from the Brian Burke era, and so is Josh Levo. I mean, guys, Connor Brown is a Brian Burke draft pick. That doesn't mean he's going to get traded. Nazem Kadri, gone, or 6-year extension, whatever. The point I am trying to make with this little video and the much longer article, I keep pointing this way because that's where my laptop is, I'm sorry. The point I'm trying to make is that there are more players in the Leafs organization, and if you want to rebuild the team, you want to make your team good, you got to worry about a lot more players than the half dozen that you have in your dreams. Look no further than the Stanley Cup Final. Look at who the Penguins have producing for them. Connor Sheary, Brian Rust. The Sharks got Jonas Donskoy as a steal. You need those steals. You need those depth guys who may end up being a little bit more. What do you think is going to happen with any of the people I just mentioned, or other players? So that is it for this one. Thank you very much for watching. Click like if you like this video. Click subscribe if you really like to. Tell all your friends, and I'm sorry, go back to enjoying the Stanley Cup Final. Matthews!